Also, if you're not, there we go. If you're not speaking, remain muted. And this is a conversation. We'll be respectful to each other as we have our communications this evening. Next slide, Maria, please. So today's objective and what we hope to achieve in this meeting is to have a conversation about the draft 2040 policy map and the recommendations within the West Inner. Before we dive into today's conversation or this evening's conversation, we'll provide some high-level information about the Charlotte Streets Map and the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map. However, a more in-depth overview of the two projects is recorded and also available on our website. And someone will drop a link in the chat for you to go to those websites and get more information. Next slide. So let's briefly go over some basic information about the two projects. So what the purpose of the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map and the Streets Map, what are we talking about when we say those two projects? The purpose of these two maps is to help us implement the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I'm quite sure you all followed that process in the past 6 months. It's our guiding document for our city's growth and development over the next 20 years. And the plan was adopted by council in June of this year. And there are now several major initiatives underway to help put this plan into action. Charlotte has a great history of not just creating plans, but we also implement those plans. And so the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map will identify appropriate locations for future development in our neighborhoods. So the plan documents set the high-level guidance, and this process brings it to the neighborhood level to talk about how we grow in the future. And the Charlotte Streets Map complements that work by providing a multimodal vision for our streets to support mobility between places we live, work, and play. So that's how we get around and connect to the things that we do in our community. And then also a step further, the UDO, which is the Unified Development Ordinance, is a set of land development regulations. So future development is aligned with the vision that we have for our community. So we have our vision, we have our land use tool, which is the policy map, and then our regulations that development uses to develop actual projects. So the Charlotte Future 2040 Policy Map and the Streets Map will both help implement the vision of the comp plan by informing how the built environment evolves and changes over time. The built environment includes land use and transportation related characteristics. So each map provides supporting information about the places we want to create. Again, the policy maps informs the development that's appropriate and serve geographies throughout the community. And the streets map defines cross sections for arterials and the future curb line location for street requirements. So that's what our streets will look like to complement the land use vision for the future. Next slide. So what are the two draft maps? With an understanding that both maps are intended to help implement the plan, let's take a closer look at the Charlotte Streets Map and then the 2040 Policy Map. Next slide. So what makes a street? I'm sure many of you experience these elements every day. This is just a photo, a generic photo that shows the different modes of and different types of elements in a street. And these various components of the street, bike and ped amenities allow for bike and ped amenities to travel lanes work in concert together to provide mobility options for all types of users. Next slide. So the street map is the map vision of our multimodal street system. We just talked about vehicles, bikes, peds. This is a map that shows how those elements will complement and build out the vision for how we move around. This tool, key implementation tool, it's also a key implementation tool for the UDO. Again, those are the land development regulations. So that will help us to have identify street classification, how many lanes are within the street, if there's going to be a bike facility, and what type of pedestrian facilities will be added to those streets as well. So this map is really important to complement our future vision. Next slide. So there's also an online comment application for the streets map. And we wanted to remind you that you can go online and review and provide comments through November 14th. When you click on the street, there will be a pop-up box that includes information about the street cross-section that you can review. There's also a video available if you provide your address, and then it'll give you instructions on how to leave a comment on the draft recommendations for your street. So that's a pretty cool tool for you to check out if you haven't already looked at that. So now let's talk about the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map. This map is a companion to the Charlotte Future 2040 comp plan and provides guidance for where and how we develop in the future. What's so important about this map, it provides a comprehensive and citywide direction for how Charlotte will balance both the needs and the opportunity that come with future growth. We haven't had a map like this in over 50 years, almost 50 years. So it's really important that we have a unified tool that talks about protecting priorities while providing those opportunities and making sure that we provide access in underserved areas and marginalized populations. Next slide. So the policy map was developed using a new tool called place types and followed a 3-step process. Place types are a new classification system to organize patterns of development. They're more complete and holistic than what we use today. Our future land use map or the policies of today only talk about the type of development in terms of residential, commercial, or institutional, like schools and hospitals, and what can be allowed on a specific property. And that's it. The place types provide more guidance around mixtures and proportions of land uses. How do different land uses relate to each other to create a more complete and cohesive place? What types of building form and character and design are appropriate in certain locations? How those things connect to each other, talking about mobility. And then it also talks about, as we create these places, how do open space and greenways and green areas also complement creating that complete place. So the place type tool was vetted by the community during the comp plan. So the maps we'll show you today are building upon the work that was adopted by council in June in terms of what the place type palette should be. Next slide. So here's that the 10 place type palette that was adopted by council, and I'll walk briefly through these, but there's some tools online that we have that you can really dive into more information about these. So they're kind of divided into 3 big buckets: live, work, and play. So we have neighborhood 1, which is essentially where our low density residential neighborhoods are. Neighborhood 2 is that transition from low density or single family homes to more intense development, residential development like apartments or small scale apartments or quadruplexes and those type and more intense townhomes. The neighborhood center starts to introduce just not residential, but more non-residential uses like small scale, commercial, like a corner store, maybe a pharmacy. It starts to introduce those uses. And then parks and preserves are where you'll see our park facilities, the green spaces, passive spaces like greenways, and then also parks. Those are parks and preserves. And then you move more to a more intense development around community activity centers. Those are the areas that you can see more intense development, like our transit station areas. Commercial is where you have your traditional retail uses like gas stations and auto services, those kind of auto-oriented type of uses that we need in our community. Also, campus is another place type where you have campuses like UNCC, our hospital facilities that are essential institution uses that are very large in scale. And then we start transitioning to our place types that offer more job opportunities that you'll find those areas. Like innovation mixed use is a transition of older industrial uses to a more retail, maybe housing, similar to what you see at Camp North End. And Savona Mill is proposed to do that. So we want to provide a place type that recognizes that transition from old industrial to more mixture of uses. And then you have your traditional manufacturing logistics, where these are largest job creators for industrial uses. And then the regional activity center like South Park, Uptown, University City area, and Ballantyne. Next slide. So I mentioned before the 3 steps. There's several data inputs used in each of the 3 mapping steps. Again, for the sake of time, we'll talk about the inputs for each one of those steps when we review the maps for the recommendations moving forward in the next couple of slides. So this map is phase 2 community conversations are organized around 15 community planning areas. That's the map on the left, which kind of highlights the area we're talking about today. That's the West Inner. Is generally bounded by I-85, 77, the southern portion of Billy Graham, western portion of Billy Graham Parkway. It also includes the recently open Links Gold Line extension to the west area, the proposed extension of the Silver Line that's planned from Independence all the way out to the airport. It includes major destinations like Fremont West and historic West End. So I just wanted to point out the area that we're talking about today. All right. So this map, we'll walk through the series of steps to create the recommended map that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So this map reflects existing development translated into the new place type tool. It was based on existing land use data and development patterns. So you will see that along the major corridors, you have a lot of the commercial place type. That's to recognize what's on the ground in terms of those more auto-oriented uses. Also note on the map where you have a lot of the campus place type kind of sprinkled around the Bays Ford area to recognize Johnson C. Smith and some of the other areas, Johnson and Wells near the Gateway area. And also really notice the neighborhood 1 designation. That's the pale yellow where a lot of our established neighborhoods are in the West End area. Next slide. So this map shows the second step in the mapping approach, where we translated the city's adopted policies and existing entitlements to place types. So that took what the city uses today in terms of land use policy and translated that tool to translated the land uses to the place type tool. So pay attention. So I want to draw your attention to the percentages, the kind of the changes in from the last map to this map. Notice in the neighborhood 2 designation that there's a significant increase in that area. That's to recognize kind of the more intense residential development that's planned for the future. And also a big jump is, I'm trying to zoom in a little bit, was the new campus. There's a big increase in that. And also a drop in the parks and preserves is kind of a big jump, but you'll see that change a little bit in the next slide. Go ahead, Maria. Next slide. So this is, it's the third map. All right. Hold on one second. Having a little problem with the map. So this is the adopted, this is the draft policy map that we have. And here are the inputs for this one. If you follow the planning process, we had the plan included an equitable growth framework that looks at where are areas of greatest need in the community in terms of access to jobs, goods, and services, and opportunities, and also environmental justice. And then looked at the plan policies and survey responses from the first phase of engagement throughout this process. And we also looked at and made sure that we understood how the area is growing, what type of infrastructure and environmental capacity do we have, meaning do we have adequate roads, stormwater, and are we creating any adverse impacts to the environment? And then how realistic is this checking against the market feasibility? Are some of these recommendations for growth not even, doesn't make sense from a market perspective? So that was kind of the last input to the policy map. Next slide. All right. I think I might have it wrong. Okay, so here is the changes from the adopted policy to the current, the draft policy map that we have now. This geography has adequate access to housing, jobs, and goods and services. So what that means is that majority of the area has a good access to housing opportunity, to jobs, and to neighborhood serving uses like food stores and pharmacy and those types of uses. Now, what I will say is that the quality, and you guys know this because you live in this area, the quality of some of those might be something that we can address as new development occurs and through other city programs. But in terms of from a purely land use perspective, that the ability to get to some of these things is greater than other parts of the community. However, we do know that there is some environmental justice issues, and that's a metric that we use that determines how neighborhoods or residents are impacted by how close they are to major highways and to industrial uses. So what we know we will do in the future is look at, as the community grows, or if there is a change in those uses that provide adverse impacts or negative impacts to the community, how do we mitigate that? How do we make sure that we're not exacerbating an issue that the community has experienced in the past by being next to these types of uses? Next slide. I cannot see. I need glass. I need to make the screen bigger. So let's look at this map. Shows the change primarily in manufacturing and logistics. As you can tell, we talked about earlier how that type of use is essential to creating jobs or providing jobs to the community. So that went down just a little bit, but it pretty much preserved what we needed to preserve in the community to provide those job opportunities. And so also remember, we saw that big jump from in the parks and preserves where it didn't show a whole lot of green space. This new map shows that there will be more green space provided in the community moving forward. Next slide. I think we already did this one, Maria. One second. So I mentioned before that we wanted to make sure we understood the growth allocations for the region and how they impact this area. So this slide shows how the growth for this area will include an additional 4,070 households. which is 3% of growth in this particular area. So we had to really make sure we understood what those numbers meant for this area so we can accommodate for that growth when we're planning for infrastructure. Next slide. Job growth as well. Within this community area, we're adding 6,000 plus jobs. And so that kind of lines up with where we saw the manufacturing and logistics and increase in activity centers. Those are all uses that provide more jobs in the community. So as we grow over time, we'll have more jobs coming to the community. Next slide. So this is the part of the conversation, the presentation where we want to hear from you. Here's the type of feedback that we really, really need. And I know you guys are anxious to hop in and share your ideas. What additional steps should be added to the current mapping approach so we make the map better, aligned with the goals of the community plan? So thinking from a systems standpoint, how can we make the map better? Are there some things that we're missing, some considerations that we need to think about? We want to hear from you about that. What adjustments need to be made to the current mapping approach so the map is more accurate? So we'll want to hear from you, and we have a couple of ways Maria will help us to navigate that. All right. So what additional steps should we add to the mapping approach, particularly around manufacturing and logistics? Is it more important to preserve existing manufacturing and logistics sites, or to consider where repurposing these areas may better serve our community needs in the future? There's a polling question for that. So I think how you do that, Maria, you go to the view options and annotate, or the polling you just
no, not yet on the annotate part. For the poll, it should pop up on everyone's screen, and then they can answer that way. So it looks like they're working on the answer right now.
Okay.
But the annotate is a couple slides away.
All right. Cool.
We'll leave it open for about 10 or 20 seconds.
Thank you.
And I can read the results.
Okay, cool.
So it looks like folks are just about done answering. We've got about 6 people who answered. I'm going to end the poll now, and then I'll read it again.
All right, so it seems like we 50-50 on the neutral and repurposing. That's good to know. I think a lot of it's naturally happened and the market's asking for it. So your input definitely confirms what we're seeing today and how we should accommodate that in the future. All right, we ready for the next one? All right, how important is it that commercial places in the community planning area in the West End evolve into neighborhood center? So remember on the map, we saw a lot of that red. How important is it to you all that it evolves to include, to become more like a neighborhood activity center where you have a mixture of different types of uses plus the commercial, traditional commercial? Okay. We'll give that a few minutes. All right.
I'm going to end the poll. It looks like about 5 people have answered it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So we're kind of mixed on this one, but I understand it'll take time to kind of change what's out there today. It's good to know how you guys feel about that. All right, next one. All right, here
Okay.
you go, Maria.
Okay, so on this next screen, we're gonna pull up the map. And since we can't sit around a table and point to a map and talk through it together, we're gonna use Zoom's annotate feature. So you should be able to either go to the top or the bottom of your Zoom screen, and there should be like a black bar, and you should be able to click either the 3 dots or view options, and then click annotate. And then there is a stamp button, and there's then a heart button within there. And so we're gonna go to the map, and then we're gonna ask you to place a heart, not necessarily because you love it, but just because we want to talk about it, and it's just the easiest stamp to see on the map. And just place the stamp on the area that you want to talk about, and we can talk through it. If you don't feel comfortable using this, we're a small enough group, I think, that you can just come off of mute or drop a message in the chat to talk about it. So I will go to the next slide. Hopefully everyone has figured out the annotate part. Okay. Oh, and I think Alicia, you wanted to mention the error the error in the map in oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh, yeah, I meant to talk about that first. So there's a very glaring error on the map in the Wesley Heights neighborhood. I think it's on Walnut Avenue, where it's coded for Community Activity Center or
That's correct. 100%.
Yep. Community Activity Center. That will be corrected. We will fix that, go back and look at how that got coded that way, but it's definitely going to be neighborhood 1. Thanks for mentioning Maria. Maria, I forgot all about it. We talked about it earlier today.
Alicia, we have one question in the chat. It's from Megan Bailey, and she's asking, what is the plan for the area? And Megan, if you want to unmute and ask more specifically what you mean by that, you're more than welcome to. If you have a small enough group, we can do that.
And Claire also has a question. So Claire, Megan, you want to come off and ask your question, and then I'll respond to Claire as well.
Sorry, are you asking, do you want me to talk?
Yes. Sure.
Oh, okay. No, sorry. I was going to say, you probably actually have several Wesley Heights neighbors joining tonight specifically because of that street, because we were told it was not in error, it was on purpose. So yes, we are all extremely wanting to know what's the plan for our neighbor. It's wonderful to hear that because that's literally across the street from where I live.
Right.
And the neighborhood has put in a great deal of effort. So we're curious about what is the plan for around the Wesley Heights area.
So thank you for asking that question. I'll just answer you and Claire's question all at the same time. And thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We had talked to a number of your neighbors earlier today, and it is an error that we will correct. There is a second draft of the map that will be produced later this year, early January, and it will reflect that change. But in the meantime, we'll take written comments through our online app, or you can email us about any other errors or changes that you have between now and November 14th. And so what that map will show, what the future of the neighborhood will be, is to continue to be a neighborhood. So it'll show up on the map as neighborhood 1. And that preserves single family residential neighborhoods. We do apologize for that, but this is why we have engagement. So, because we don't always get it right, and we need your help, because you know your neighborhood better than we do, and we need that kind of feedback to help get it right. So thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing your input and your time.
Oh, thanks for having us.
We really
there are still some just on the edges of the neighborhood, I guess I'm still just curious about when looking at the map.
Okay.
Some of it still looks like it's including a couple houses even beyond, like on Grandin. Right, I can't tell. So I just wanted to also understand all of the houses in the whole neighborhood shouldn't be affected.
Yeah, so if you could, Megan, if you don't mind, use the online tool, if you could point those out specifically.
Mhm.
Because as we talked about before, a lot of the inputs, there may be some translation issues. It depends on what the zoning is. Like if it's zoned for something else and there's a house on it, we want to make sure we fix that and make
Mhm.
sure that it's reflected accurately moving forward. So we do need you guys' help in doing that. Just point out what you think is a mistake, and then we'll take it back, look at it, and then the next draft will make the reflection of those types of changes. And then just look at how that type of process, the way we mapped it, that actual process, how that might have happened in other parts of the year of the community too.
Okay, so we won't actually really know until the next draft comes out, like what's gonna be
So
corrected or the overall plan.
we'll post responses to the comments that we received through these 30 meetings that we're having by mid-December, earliest December 1st. We should have it sooner than that. And it'll be a combination of here's what we heard from a verbal standpoint, and here's what we heard from a mapping standpoint, because it's kind of two things, two parts. People are giving us comments on the actual map, and then folks are giving us written comments. So it's taking a little bit of time to respond to both, because you actually have to make either a methodology change or responding to someone who just has a question. So give us December 1st to know what the disposition is or how we plan to respond, and then the map comes out early January. Does that make sense?
Yep,
Okay, cool.
thank you.
You're welcome. Katanya has a question.
Hey, Alicia, I don't have a question. I just wanted to give the community a little bit of background because we had and for you too, and I talked to Gretchen earlier today, but we had a community meeting yesterday. I serve on the board at, in our Wesley Heights community. We had a meeting yesterday that I didn't speak to Gretchen until this morning about the error. And so at the meeting last night, I had communicated that it wasn't an error because I think last week, I spoke to another member that was just saying, this is the process. All these things are not set in stone, but for now, this is what it is. And I think that was prior to you guys realizing your internal pull up, recently. So I appreciate you going through the context of how you come to put out these maps and how they even come about for before they're published. So that I just wanted to clarify. We were just kind of missing each other in all of our communications.
It happens. It happens. Just know that you can always call on us and ask us to participate in your neighborhood meeting when that happens, or if it happens in the future. We'll definitely be happy to participate so you can have that firsthand information from us. So
that's
thank you
great.
for that.
And yep, and that was my intention, but Gretchen and I just kind of missed each other until this morning. So yeah.
Okay.
Good deal. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, we have one heart on the screen. I think that's what I see, one heart. Any
It's the
other
one
comments
heart on the Wesley Heights?
Yeah, any other comments? Because it's such a small group, you're welcome to come off mute and just share your thoughts. I know many of you likely were on about the Wesley Heights issue.
Hey, this is Matt Weschler, sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna unmute myself. I'm a Smallwood neighborhood resident, live close to the Roselle's Ferry corridor. And I was just reviewing the place types map, and I had I sorry I missed the how to use the heart tool correctly. I just had a couple questions on an area close to the Smallwood neighborhood, like around the Savannah Mill
Mhm.
neighbor or use area. And I was just wondering, I know that some of these place types, you could probably go one way or another in how you classify it. Specifically, I'm thinking of like there's this area along Roselle's Ferry Road that where Toucan Louie's, which is one of our favorite restaurants to walk to on Sunday mornings, is located, and we think it's like a pretty, that area could really become a nice walkable sort of neighborhood community center with future development. There's a lot of townhomes that are coming in along Roselle's Ferry Road, and I'm just wondering what the city takes into consideration when they look at changing something from commercial to like the neighborhood center, and what goes into that process, and who kind of makes the final decision on that reclassification.
So it depends on if you're talking about this process, which is talking about the future use of properties moving forward. So if you're suggesting that we consider Roselle's Ferry near Toucan and what's the new place? The dental office.
West Side Grill. Oh
yeah,
yeah,
that's it.
That's
West
right.
Side Grill. I live around the corner, so I'm not in Smallwood, but I live close by. The thing about that, to be honest, it's that particular area. It could possibly be. We'll have to look at the thresholds because we have concentrations of those type of uses up to a certain like square footage, like how many square feet of Toucan Louis type meeting areas constitute a neighborhood center. And it could just be that it's right on the threshold for the future or not. The challenge is that we have growth allocations for the entire city, all 360 plus square miles of how we're going to grow as a community. And so we have to allocate those kind of throughout the community in an equitable way. And when you take some from one area and put it in the other, we have to make sure that it makes sense to meet those total growth numbers. So what we can do, if you put a dot or put it in the chat, your comment about considering that area for a neighborhood center, we can look at the thresholds and see what happens or see what can happen. We can do that.
I captured the comment in this. Yeah, I got it.
All right, thanks, Gretchen. But thank you, Matthew.
Sure thing. And I guess the follow up to that is just, considering with the Savannah Mill build out and the extension of the Greenway kind of going right up into that area, people from outside the neighborhood also coming in and using, kind of converting or using that Greenway to be a way to get from other parts of the city to destinations within Smallwood, I think would also help encourage a mix of uses and sort of destination spots, which would also be neighborhood supporting.
It's coded now currently as innovation mixed use, which is the same classification similar to Camp North End. So it does look at that transition of that older industrial to providing an opportunity for more retail and housing and other uses backing up to the Greenway. If it's not coded that way, I'm looking at it, I think it is. We can make sure yeah, that's it. So I think it aligns with what you're thinking, Matthew, or what we have it coded for today, backing up to the Greenway. But thank you for that. We'll make sure, double check. Anything else?
I had a couple
Yeah.
other questions.
ahead.
I want to give everybody else a chance to ask anything that they're interested in asking.
No takers? Go ahead, Matthew.
Sure. So just I'm trying to understand the process in a little more detail. At the end of all of this, there's going to be the draft or the policy map is it getting voted on by city council at the same time as the UDO? Does it all happen in one vote next year?
No, no. What happens is that the policy map goes first. That's early winter, late winter, early spring. Next year, we're thinking February, March. That's our tentative schedule for adoption by council. That establishes kind of the land use vision, like how do we want to grow? And then the UDO follows later that summer with the rules to implement the vision. So it's kind of an incremental step. All of it goes before council and they approve it. So there will be another round of public hearing, public engagement kind of thing with them. So that's the process moving forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And I guess the next step after that, so is every parcel in the city is going to get rezoned based off of these new place types, and at what point does that happen in the process?
So the policy map is just that, it's just policy, it is not zoning. So it will not rezone anyone's property. It will just be, this map will be used for council and the community and developers in understanding the city's vision for future growth and development. So that's kind of it's just a policy map to help make those land use decisions and how we invest in the community moving forward. It doesn't change any zoning. The UDO, once adopted, will begin providing provide the zoning translation. I think it's in a 2 or 3 step process, and that will likely start next fall after the UDO is adopted. So this map does not impact zoning at all, but the UDO will provide, the Unified Development Ordinance will impact zoning.
So just so I understand right, do all properties at that point down the line get rezoned at the same time, or is it like as each, because the UDO, all the regulations are going to be specific to the new zoning districts.
Mm-hmm. So it'll happen.
I guess that's a question.
It'll happen in batches. It won't happen all at once, because some districts are simpler to translate from the old ordinance to the new one, right? And so it'll happen in various steps, but it'll all be a public process, so the community will know what that process is and how it's happening and when it happens. So you won't just wake up one day with the new zoning district and you not know what it is. That won't happen. But it'll happen in phases because there's so many. I think there are over 300,000 parcels in the city. So it'll take some time to do that. It'll happen in steps, definitely phases. The easier stuff goes first, and then the other probably more intense districts will go after that. I'm oversimplifying it, but I'm oversimplifying it. Don't get me wrong, but I don't want you to think that once the ordinance is adopted, all the parcels change to this new ordinance the next day. No, it'll happen in phases.
Sure.
Yeah.
Understood and appreciate that. So I'm just curious, does that mean there'll be a period of time where the old ordinance still applies to part of the city that hasn't been rezoned yet, and the new ordinance only applies to the parts of the city that are rezoned?
So I think there will be, and I have my other colleagues on the phone from the UDO team, but I do think there will be a 3-month period where the old ordinance still is in place, but there will be an effective date that will be published once the adoption happens. So when council adopts the UDO, they will tell the community, or it will be publicly known when it will be effective. And so that effective date, there'll be a little bit of a lag, not a long time, because it's just not very efficient to administer two ordinances. It's confusing. I know a couple of communities around the country that have done it, and it's painful. So it won't be a big lag, but there will be an effective date as to with this map too.
Gotcha. So if I understood right, after the UDO is adopted, there is a period of time where where the entire city is going to get rezoned in batches, but there'll be an effective date where the entire city, has been rezoned.
Yep.
And then that's when the the new UDO, I guess, would officially replace the old ordinances.
Hey, Alicia, can I jump in real quick?
Please do, Allison. He's got real technical on me.
I wanted to help a friend. One of the things that I would note is to go to table 3.1 in the draft UDO, and there's a table that translates the existing zoning districts today into what they would be when the effective date of the UDO is. And like Alicia is saying, it's probably 3 months or so after the adoption date. But when it's effective, the zoning district will then become whatever is in that translation table. And then at some point, we will go back and do some type of alignment rezoning to make sure that the zoning districts on the ground align with what the place type mapping has identified as being the aspirational or future desired state. And so exactly what goes first, we're still talking through all that, but like Alicia said, it's certainly a public process, and we'll have public engagement opportunities and all those sorts of things.
Gotcha. Thanks, Allison, for explaining that a little bit further.
Christopher's had his hand up a while. Christopher.
Yeah, good evening. I'm probably the cause of the concern over the Wesley Heights land use type. I made my neighbors aware of it, so I'm glad that it apparently seems to have been noted as a mistake. I do have some other questions regarding some of the use types located or that are shown on the map, and wondering how that will be translated as the UDO takes effect and as the process moves forward. A couple of specific items are the area, what it commonly referred to as Lower Tuck, where Berry Hill, Thrift Road, and Tuckasegee kind of come together. On the map, it's denoted as manufacturing logistics, which I believe in as part of history that it was. But anybody familiar with the place kind of understands that area is quickly transitioning to more a retail commercial district than manufacturing and logistics. Similarly, as development starts to continue to push down Freedom Drive, both sides of Freedom Drive are kind of listed as commercial, where some have already been taken over near what is known as the Kmart shopping plaza, with multifamily and some mixed use areas. So I'm just wondering how the what is labeled on the map translate to kind of what's there, with the Berry Hill Academy of Technology listed as commercial, and I kind of crossed the way as the Enderley Neighborhood Park listed as Neighborhood 1. Are those areas that are odd for that type of development, or based more off of what they're currently there, not necessarily what is potentially forthcoming?
So Christopher, there's a couple of things. bunch of different areas and a lot of different comments about them. I hope, I think Gretchen's capturing them all. I'll start with the Lower Tuck area. That the color, how we arrived at that today, as I illustrated in the previous maps, is there was a policy directive that's a big part of methodology to preserve industrial. So some of that area, a lot of that area is industrial, either zone or is changing over. If your suggestion is that we look at more of how that can transition to something else because the market pressure is already there, that's something we can look at for that particular area. Along Freedom, I see the area where you're talking about is commercial. Some of it, I do believe, is, I think behind it is, the first part of it is recognizing it with neighborhood too. That might be, I think that might be closer to the Fremont West area. But if you're suggesting we take
Yes.
a look at further down and what that might be, in terms of it transitioning to neighborhood center or not, then we can definitely take a look at that for that particular area. So I think we'll take those notes and go back and look at what that might be.
I captured the comments.
Thanks, Gretchen.
Yeah, it was just kind of one of the areas there along Freedom Drive seemed like it was in the comprehensive plan, kind of denoted as an area low in housing options. And to see it kind of denoted as commercial use, knowing how growth is moving that direction up Freedom towards Interstate 85,
Yeah,
seemed a little bit in conflict with some of the metric maps in the plan.
yeah, it's kind
And
of
again-
hard. Oh, go ahead.
No, and again, it's more about a question about, kind of overall potentially being able, which was really the reason we have got up in arms about the Woodruff Walnut Avenue. I'm an architect, so I kind of deal with developers kind of constantly, and any opportunity to take advantage of planning obstacles, they're more than adequate to do so very quickly. So I don't want to see Enderley Coffee, which is typically or is specifically in a manufacturing and logistics building. However, it's not exactly what they're performing at this time. So it's more about an overall question of how these map regions are kind of dispersed with the forthcoming UDO and what the opportunities to do something in this manufacturing logistics zone, once that goes into effect, would be affected.
Right. The challenge is, Christopher, I'm sure you're aware of this, for those, specifically those two type of land uses, it's very difficult to justify taking away existing zoning rights, like entitlements that people currently have. That's the challenge, especially where that commercial is. And I know we have a goal within the comp plan that talks about providing more housing opportunity, but to go from commercial to residential along a major thoroughfare, that would be a little bit difficult. But I get your point about maybe is there opportunity to introduce residential closer to what might be just straight commercial today, might be something we can look at, especially in those that industrial area too. It's the I move might make sense. We'll look at the thresholds and the parcel sizes and ownership to make sure it makes sense.
Understood. It's just, it just so happens that I don't want to lose commercial, but there's those generally have large parcels of land that can be more easily kind of converted into those neighborhood benefiting developments, instead of having to put together 6 or 7 or 8 different parcels. You can, for instance, the Kmart parcel, it's just a large parcel of land. So I just kind of wanted to make sure that this had that in mind with those districts specifically.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys, we have 1 minute. But that doesn't mean that we stop the conversation. I think Kathy put in the chat, Gretchen put in the chat, our online application, continue to look at the map and provide more comments. So our community conversations that I mentioned, we have a very robust schedule between now and November 10th. If you can't make, or your neighbors can't make the meetings today, or there's potential opportunities in the future to learn about other areas and to make a couple of makeup sessions. Our comment application, as I mentioned, is open until November 14th. Hard copies to provide comments are available at our libraries and our YMCAs. And then the second draft of the map will come out early 2022, as I mentioned in the process a little bit earlier. We'll post comments by December and before we release another draft of this map early next year. So with that, I do thank you all for spending your time with us this evening. Hopefully we'll see you soon, and please continue to participate in the process, encourage your neighbors to do so as well.